For some time now, if you are a protester or even involved in or near the protests in Portland, Trump's weird multidisciplinary goon squad has been targeting you, including journalists, by the way. Now, thankfully, that was sort of blocked, but Trump is not gonna stand for that. And so apparently behind the scenes, there's been these efforts to renew the targeting of journalists, both in terms of arrests and in terms of physical harassment and violence. And joining us now to break it down is the man who broke the story himself, reporter for The Nation, Ken Klippenstein. Mr. Klippenstein, welcome back to the show.
Hey, John, good to see you again.
Glad to have you here. You've done it again. So a leak revealed the sort of, I guess, like an end round the new restrictions that they're going to use to continue their targeting of members of the media?
Yeah, so what's shocking about this is people will recall several weeks ago, President Trump vowed to designate Antifa a terrorist organization, and he came into a few roadblocks. As you can imagine, the president had anticipated that you can't just do that willy-nilly to American citizens or American residents because we have certain rights and liberties here. But one way that you can get around that is if you're able to prove or show evidence that they're individuals in the US are taking direction from a foreign group. And so what this intelligence report, which was leaked to me from a source of mine in DHS, shows is that they're trying to do just that. They're trying to find individuals they consider Antifa, and I should stress they consider, because when I interviewed one of them, they said, I've never considered myself Antifa or an anarchist or whatever you want to, I consider myself a socialist. So this is sort of their own opinion, because again, Antifa is not actually a group. There's no membership. You can't ask to join Antifa, see what happens.
Yeah, I keep sending letters and I haven't gotten a response yet. Yeah, and look, there's a lot of things all tied up in this, but I know that you've also done a lot of great work in making sure that people know in previous work that despite the fact that in the early stages of the protests, it was being declared that it's all Antifa. And ever since then, they've been claiming that these are the people that are doing all the violence. And even if it ends up being a white supremacist that kills someone, still somehow it was Antifa. You've revealed again through, I think it was FBI reports, that there's no intelligence showing that there's an actual concern about Antifa specifically.
That's exactly right. The intelligence report I got was actually the same day that Trump said we're going to designate them a terror organization. And so, I was given this report that showed that in the DC area where all these protests were happening, where they ended up gassing protesters with tear gas and all these things, there was no evidence to say, they were unable to find any evidence that Antifa was behind any of that. Now, that's not to say they couldn't find evidence that people were behind, property destruction and violence. But the problem is that evidence pointed to far right white nationalist groups, not Antifa. So whatever you think of it, I mean, The Guardian recently published a sort of summary of an academic report on violence committed by Antifa, and they couldn't find a single death attributable to them in 25 years. And now compare that to the dozens of deaths that we've seen by white nationalist far right groups, which, by the way, Trump's own FBI director, whom he appointed, Chris Wray, says is the chief counterterror concern that we have right now.
Yeah, and that of course has been true for some time, but I've just resolved myself to the idea that until there's a change in the administration, it doesn't matter how obvious the threat is or how many murders or literally ambushing and killing police officers. It doesn't matter. The facts on the ground don't matter. It is inconvenient to their narrative, and they're not going to acknowledge it. But you mentioned the connecting individuals to overseas like terror organizations and things like that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So maybe if you could explain what connection do they think is there, or is it just a convenient excuse? Do they actually believe that, for instance, leftist online media personalities are connected to international terror organizations?
Yeah, so what you're alluding to, I assume, is Brace Baldwin, who's one of the people named in this report. He's the host of a very popular left-wing podcast called True Anon. He was he endorsed Bernie, definitely to the left. And that was sort of characteristic of the folks they picked on in this report, because a lot of them were from the left. They had gone to Syria, traveled to Syria, in some cases fought alongside US allies, the Kurds. So for example, the YPG, the Peshmerga, forces that the US and the DOD themselves worked with and coordinated with to defeat ISIS in Syria. So, I mean, we can have a debate about if you think it's advisable to go fight there or if you think it's, good or bad or whatever. But the fact that this is, that this comports with US policy in the region, I think is beyond debate. I mean, they were working very closely with them. So it's hard for me to say the US would basically be saying these guys are terrorists who we worked with. which I not something they're going to want to say. In any case, the evidence that they're trying to pull together suggests that they're still getting some sort of direction from these groups, which is ludicrous. Because I interviewed Brace Belden for this story, and he said, I went there, I fought for about a year, came back, haven't had much contact with them since. Why would they? What interest did the Kurds have in domestic U.S. affairs? Yeah. I mean, their concerns are establishing a Kurdish state in the Middle East. I can't imagine they're very worried about the United States domestic situation.
Yeah, and I have to assume that regardless of that particular story, I'm guessing that's not representative of the experience of the vast majority of the journalists who are being tear gassed or targeted or investigated or spied upon. I have a feeling that's probably a bit of an outlier. And that's why my concern is that this sort of justification, it's like how they keep saying every time reopening the schools is mentioned, they have their little stat that only one person below 18 died in New Jersey. That's what they'll say. Doesn't matter if it's not representative of anything else. And so I'm curious, I know that you've talked to a lot of people as this whole thing is developed, both in Portland and now it's spreading to other cities. My worry is that other journalists are going to continue to be rounded up, kidnapped, brutalized, and that this will be the cover that will be provided. Am I wrong, basically?
I think you're right to have that concern, because when you look at how this intelligence report and the different intelligence agencies generally have defined Antifa, it's extremely broad. So just quoting from one report I was given from the DHS, it characterizes it as inclusive of anti-authoritarian groups, anti-fascist groups, anarchist groups, socialists, communists. I mean, that is a huge brush to paint with. I have a feeling there's a whole lot of people in this country that are opposed to fascism, whether or not they want to call themselves Antifa. And unfortunately, that's really what it comes down to. Because since there's no formal membership, these intelligence agencies can just decide, well, it looks like this person's a member of Antifa, because there's no membership. There's no, This is a tendency. The document itself describes Antifa as a sort of attitude, a tendency. So it seems like they're treating as an organization, as a group, an attitude, a belief, which is crazy.
Yeah, it feels like the Red Menace, but even looser and less well-defined. It feels more blatantly political than that was. And that's one of the dark times of American politics.
Yeah, so a senior former intelligence official with DHS that I quoted in the story compared it to COINTELPRO, and that really raised the hairs on my neck, because without getting into too much specifics, this individual is not a left-wing person. He's not someone that's always talking about the anti-war movement and this and that. I had never heard him speak this way, so I was really shocked by that. And I think it was inapt. He has more knowledge of programs and classified programs that we don't know about that they're doing, but that's how he characterized it. And what's frightening about that to me is that when you look back at COINTELPRO, the evidence was bunk, and they tried to tie Martin Luther King Jr. and all sorts of figures that you would think of as just honest dissidents. They tried to tie them to Soviet Russia, to the USSR, and as crazy as that was, at least that's a group that had money and could, in principle, recruit people. I mean, if you're talking about the Kurds, I mean, they're not even a state. This is like a group. Or if you're talking about Antifa, that's absolutely not a country or even it's not even a nonprofit. It's nothing. It's just a belief system, Yeah,
it's like defining an organization based on people being contrarian or something. Right. It's like, you can't do that. Yeah, those people are annoying. They're not a terrorist organization. Yeah, it's the entire thing is incredibly frustrating. And I know that we're really touching on a lot of different stories that you've worked on. But the reason is I want people to go and look at your work at The Nation, because in this area, you've done like better than anyone else I don't know how you track down all these documents. You are the leak master. It's great that we have you out there working, especially considering the stakes in this area.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for talking about it. I'm always glad to be in a medium people engage with and actually use. I'm under no illusion that anybody reads. No one reads, so it's nice to get this story out to people.
Well, I do know one thing that they engage with, and that is your social media and Signal. So if people have information, how can they get that to you?
Hit me up on Signal. It's a free encrypted app that will conceal your messages. And my phone number is 202-510-1268.
Awesome. Ken Klippenstein, thank you as always.
Thanks a lot, man.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.